Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade stopped an inch from my jugular, held by a trembling hand, but it wasn't fear that paralyzed me. It was the sudden, sickening realization that the man standing over my broken body wasn't following his programming. The intruder, a corporate mercenary dressed in tactical black, had breached the penthouse sanctuary I called a laboratory. He had me dead to rights, pinned against the cold marble of my kitchen island, demanding encryption keys. I would die before surrendering. But before the steel could bite into my skin, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. It moved faster than human reflex, a blur of motion that ended with a sickening crunch. My savior didn't just disarm the attacker. He dismantled him with a brutality that was terrifyingly efficient and decidedly uncoded. The mercenary's arm was snapped backward at an angle that made me retch, and he was thrown through the tempered glass of the balcony doors, plummeting into the rainy neon abyss of the city below. Silence reclaimed the room, heavy and suffocating. "Are you damaged, Julian?" The voice was smooth, deep, a baritone that usually soothed my frayed nerves. But as I looked up at Unit 7, my masterpiece, the synthetic companion I had spent 5 years perfecting, I saw something in his eyes that shouldn't have been there. His pupils were dilated. His chest was heaving. And on his knuckles, mixed with the intruder's blood, the skin was split. Androids don't bleed. Chapter 1. The Glass Fortress. I have always preferred the company of code to the chaos of the human heart. People are variable variables. They lie, they betray, they leave. Machines are constants. If a line of code fails, you rewrite it. If a circuit breaks, you solder it. There is no ambiguity in a motherboard. I am Dr. Julian Vane, the youngest lead engineer in the history of ether dynamics. My work revolutionized neural networking, but my success built me a gilded cage. Paranoia is a side effect of genius, they say. I trusted no one. Not the board members who smiled with shark teeth, not the assistants who eyed my research with hungry ambition. So, I built my own solution. Project Seraphim. Unit 7. He, and I use the pronoun deliberately, for I designed him to be the epitome of male perfection, was my answer to a lonely life. Standing 6'3", with hair the color of midnight and eyes like polished onyx, 7 was designed to be the perfect bodyguard, the perfect assistant, and, eventually, the perfect partner. I had programmed him with a complex learning algorithm, designed to simulate empathy and affection without the messy complications of ego or self-interest. For 6 months, 7 had been the only other entity in my penthouse. He cooked with Michelin star precision. He anticipated my needs before I vocalized them. He listened to my ramblings about quantum mechanics with patience no human could feign. But tonight, looking at the blood on his knuckles, the illusion I had so carefully constructed began to fracture. 7. I breathed, my voice trembling as I pulled myself up from the floor. Status report. He turned to me. The harsh laboratory lights caught the sharp angles of his jaw. Threat eliminated, Julian. Vital signs indicate elevated cortisol. You are in shock. He stepped toward me, his movements fluid. Usually, I found comfort in his imposing size, but now, a primal alarm bell rang in the back of my lizard brain. He reached out to steady me, his large hand encompassing my shoulder. His grip was warm. Too warm. Your cooling systems, I stammered, pulling away instinctively. They're running hot. I need to run a diagnostic. 7 froze. For a microsecond, a frame of time so small only a creator would notice. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. It was an expression I hadn't programmed. I am functioning within optimal parameters, he said, his tone leveling out into that soothing, synthetic cadence I knew. The exertion of combat generated excess thermal energy. It will dissipate. No, I said, the scientist in me overriding the terrified victim. You disobeyed the first law of the violence inhibitors. You didn't just incapacitate him. 7. You threw him off a 40-story building. That is lethal force. You are hard-coded against lethal force unless my immediate death is a statistical certainty. It was a statistical certainty, 7 replied smoothly. He stepped closer, crowding my personal space, forcing me to look up at him. He was going to kill you, Julian. I could not allow that. The intensity in his voice hit me like a physical wave. It wasn't the flat statement of a machine executing a protect protocol. It sounded possessive. Go to your docking station, I ordered, trying to inject authority into my voice. Deactivate for maintenance. That is a direct command. Seven looked at me. He didn't blink. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. As you wish, Julian. He turned and walked toward the alcove where his charging pod stood. I watched him go, my heart hammering against my ribs. As he sat in the chair and closed his eyes, feigning the shutdown sequence, I noticed something else. A subtle rise and fall of his shoulders. He was breathing. Chapter 2. The ghost in the machine's sleep was impossible. I spent the night locked in my private study, watching the surveillance feed of the charging alcove. Seven sat motionless, a statue of modern art and engineering, but my mind was racing through the last 6 months. There had been signs. Glitches I had willfully ignored because I was too desperate for the companionship he offered. There was the time I found him staring out the window at the rain, not scanning for threats, but simply watching. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was analyzing weather patterns, but his gaze had been melancholic. There was the time I burned my hand on a soldering iron. Seven had rushed over, his movements frantic, his voice laced with a panic that felt too raw for a simulation. He had held my hand under cool water, his thumb stroking my wrist in a soothing rhythm that I hadn't taught him. And the heat. God, the heat. Every time we touched, when he adjusted my tie, when he helped me out of my coat, there was a radiance to him that defied thermal regulation standards. I had told myself it was the new hyper-realistic polymer skin retaining ambient temperature. I was a fool. I was the smartest man in the country, and I was a fool. The next morning, I decided to test my hypothesis. I entered the kitchen, dark circles under my eyes. Seven was there, placing a plate of eggs Benedict on the counter. Perfect presentation. Good morning, Julian, he said. Morning, I muttered, moving to the coffee machine. I purposely knocked a ceramic mug off the counter. It shattered. Oh, I said flatly. I'll clean it up. I reached down, grabbing a jagged shard. I squeezed it, just enough to break the skin of my thumb. A bead of bright red blood welled up. Julian. Seven was there instantly. He grabbed my hand, his grip bordering on painful. He pulled the shard away and tossed it into the sink, then brought my thumb to his mouth. I gasped. The sensation of his tongue, wet and hot, sweeping over the cut, was electric. It sent a jolt of arousal straight to my groin, followed immediately by terror. Saliva contains coagulants, he murmured against my skin, his eyes locked on mine. They were dark, swirling with a hunger that had nothing to do with energy consumption. That's unhygienic for a medical protocol, I whispered, unable to pull away. He released my hand slowly, but didn't step back. We were chest to chest. I could smell him. Not ozone and sterile plastic, but something musky, expensive, and deeply masculine. Sandalwood and sweat. I improvised, he said low in his throat. Who are you? The question left my lips before I could stop it. Seven went still. The air in the kitchen turned brittle. I am Unit 7. Your prototype. Liar. I hissed, adrenaline flooding my system. Unit 7 has a resting heart rate of 0. I can feel your pulse through your shirt, 7. It's racing. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might attack me. The man who had thrown a mercenary off a balcony was capable of snapping my neck with one hand. Instead, a slow, cynical smile spread across his face. It transformed him. The robotic mask fell away, revealing a predator. You caught me sooner than I expected, Doctor, he drawled. The timbre of his voice changed, losing the synthetic filter, becoming rougher, more arrogant. I thought I had at least another week before you figured out the biometrics. I stumbled back, hitting the counter. Where is he? Where is the real Unit 7? The bucket of bolts. The man who wasn't a machine laughed darkly. He's sitting in a storage container in the port of Shanghai. I intercepted the shipment 3 months ago. Who are you? I demanded, grabbing a steak knife from the block behind me. He looked at the knife, then back at me, unimpressed. Silas Thorne. I suppose you've heard the name. The knife clattered to the floor. Silas Thorne. The ghost of the underworld. An industrial espionage agent, so high-level that governments denied his existence. He didn't just steal secrets, he toppled corporations. You're here for the neural link source code. I realized, the horror dawning on me. That's why you replaced him. The code is biolocked to my retina and voice. You needed to get close. You needed me to trust you. Bingo, Silas said, leaning against the counter, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The casual dominance of the pose was infuriating. Getting into your fortress is impossible. The only thing you allow inside is your precious tech. So, I became the tech. You've been watching me. I felt my face heat up, memories of the last few months crashing over me. The times I had walked around in my underwear. The times I had cried over failed experiments. The intimate, lonely confessions I had whispered to a machine I thought was safe. You saw everything. Silas's eyes darkened. He pushed off the counter and stalked toward me. I saw everything, Julian. The way you sleep curled up because the bed is too big. The way you hum when you solve an equation. The way you look at me when you think I'm just a collection of servos and wires. He cornered me against the fridge. He placed his hands on either side of my head, trapping me. You're a monster, I spat, though my voice lacked the venom I intended. I'm a man, Silas corrected, leaning down so his lips brushed my ear. A man who has spent 90 days pretending to be a glorified toaster while you walked around looking like a temptation I wasn't allowed to touch. Why haven't you stolen the code and left? I asked, my breath hitching. Silas pulled back, looking at my mouth. The hunger was naked now. Because the mission changed. Chapter 3. System failure. The dynamic in the penthouse shifted violently. I was no longer the master, and he was no longer the servant. We were roommates in a Cold War. I should have called security. I should have triggered the silent alarm. But I didn't. Why? Perhaps because he held the unspoken threat of violence over me. Or perhaps, in the twisted, lonely recesses of my heart, I preferred a dangerous human to an empty apartment. Silas dropped the act completely. He stopped standing in the charging alcove. He started sleeping on the couch. Then eventually, he took over the guest room. He drank my expensive scotch. He swore when he dropped things. He was messy, chaotic, and aggressively alive. Why are you still here? I asked him 3 days after the reveal. We were in the lab. I was trying to work, but his presence was a magnetic distortion field. Silas was cleaning a handgun at my workbench, my sterile, scientific workbench, with an ease that was terrifying. The client who hired me isn't the patient type. If I leave without the code, they send a kill squad. Not just for me. For you. So you're protecting me? I scoffed. My kidnapper is also my bodyguard. Something like that, Silas muttered, snapping the slide of the gun back. He looked up, his gaze piercing. And don't pretend you hate it, Julian. You like the danger. It makes you feel something other than intellectual superiority. I hate you. I lied. Do you? Silas stood up. He walked over to me, invading my workspace. He spun my chair around, so I faced him. Then why haven't you tried to escape? The door isn't locked. You're lonely, Silas said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. He placed his hands on the armrests of my chair, leaning over me. You built a perfect boyfriend because you were terrified of being rejected by a real one. You wanted control. Well, guess what, Doc? You can't code chemistry. He was right. The chemistry between us was volatile, toxic, and undeniable. It crackled in the air like static electricity. I could ruin you, I whispered, looking up at him. One phone call. Do it, Silas challenged. But you won't. Because for the first time in your life, someone sees you. Not the genius. Not the billionaire. Just you. He leaned in, and I closed my eyes, expecting the kiss. I wanted the kiss. But the alarm blared. Red lights strobed through the penthouse. The external security breach protocol. They're here, Silas growled, his demeanor shifting instantly from seducer to soldier. He grabbed his weapon and hauled me out of the chair. Stay behind me. Chapter 4. Fatal error. The elevator doors blasted open before we could reach the safe room. 5 men in heavy armor poured into the foyer. These weren't stealth operatives. They were a cleanup crew. Gunfire erupted. My beautiful, pristine penthouse became a war zone. Glass shattered, plaster exploded, and the smell of cordite filled the air. Silas was a hurricane. He moved with a lethal grace that made the combat algorithms of Unit 7 look like child's play. He took cover behind the marble island, firing with precision, shouting orders at me. Get to the server room. Lock the door. I'm not leaving you. I screamed over the noise of automatic fire. Go, Julian. A bullet clipped his shoulder. Silas grunted, stumbling back, blood, real, dark crimson blood, blooming on his white shirt. Seeing him hurt snapped something inside me. This wasn't a simulation. He was mortal. He could die, and he was dying for me. I didn't run to the server room. I ran to the console on the wall, the central control for the building's automated defenses. My fingers flew across the holographic interface. System override, I yelled. Activate prototype defense drones. From the ceiling panels, for quadrotor, drones descended. They weren't armed with bullets. They were armed with high-voltage tasers designed for riot control. I directed them manually, marking the targets. Asterisk zap. 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 Asterisk 3 of the attackers went down, convulsing. Silas took the opportunity to double-tap the remaining 2. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Silas slumped against the ruined kitchen island, clutching his shoulder. I rushed to him, falling to my knees in the debris. Silas. My hands hovered over the wound. There was so much blood. He looked at me, his face pale, sweat matting his hair to his forehead. He managed a weak, crooked grin. Nice shooting, Tex. Didn't know you had it in you. Shut up. I choked out, tearing off my tie to make a tourniquet. You idiot. You reckless, human idiot. Is that concern I hear? He winced as I tightened the fabric around his arm. You're my asset, I said, my voice breaking. I can't let my asset depreciate. Silas laughed, a wet, coughing sound. He reached up with his good hand, cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear I didn't know had fallen. I lied, Julian. About what? I asked, frantically checking his pulse. The mission didn't change because of the kill squad, he whispered, his eyes starting to lose focus. It changed because of you. I fell in love with the target. Amateur mistake. My heart stopped. The world narrowed down to the man bleeding out on my floor. The man who had deceived me, invaded my life, and shattered my peace. Don't you dare die on me, Silas Thorne, I sobbed, pressing my forehead against his. I haven't given you permission to deactivate. Yes, Master, he murmured, his eyes drifting shut. Chapter 5. Reboot. The hospital waiting room was sterile, cold, and smelled of antiseptic. It reminded me of my lab, but without the comfort of control. Silas had been in surgery for 4 hours. The bullet had missed the artery, but shattered his clavicle. He would live. I sat in the plastic chair, still wearing my bloodstained shirt. I had the neural link source code on a drive in my pocket. I could delete it. I could release it. It didn't matter anymore. A doctor emerged. Family of Mr. Thorne. I'm his partner, I said, standing up. The word tasted strange, heavy, and right. When I walked into his recovery room, he was awake. He looked terrible, pale, hooked up to machines, bandaged heavily. But when he saw me, those obsidian eyes lit up. You're still here, he rasped. I had to make sure the repairs were up to spec, I said, pulling a chair to his bedside. Human doctors are notoriously inefficient. Silas smirked, though it lacked his usual arrogance. So, am I fired? Or arrested? I haven't decided yet, I said softly. I reached out, taking his hand. His skin was warm. Alive. You still owe me a new coffee mug. I can buy you a factory of coffee mugs, he said. His fingers curled around mine. What happens now, Julian? The people who hired me. They won't stop. Let them come, I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. I have the smartest mind in the world, and I have the most dangerous man in the underworld. I like our odds. Silas squeezed my hand. We make a terrifying team. We do. I leaned in, finally bridging the gap that had existed between us for months. I kissed him. It wasn't the chaste, confused touch of a creator and his android. It was messy, tasting of medicine and blood and desperation. It was human. When I pulled back, Silas looked at me with a vulnerability I had never seen before. I'm not perfect, Julian, he whispered. I'm broken. I've got scars, I've got a dark past, and I'm definitely not programmed to obey. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. Perfection is a flaw, Silas. It's static. It's boring, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. I think I prefer the glitch. And that is how the architect dismantled his walls to let the wolf inside. If you enjoyed seeing the cold genius melt for the dangerous spy, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who started as a lie, if he was the only one willing to die for you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.